Good morning from me in McLean, Virginia, and good afternoon, I suspect, for most of you. I'm delighted to be joining you, and I only wish it could be in person. I have to say, I love India as a country. I've worked with many Indian companies, and I even studied Indian politics when I was at college. So when you're meeting face-to-face next year, please do invite me. I'd love to spend some time with you all together. We're here today to talk about PR as a force for positive change. And what a time to be talking about this, in a year dominated by uncertainty, by hyperbole, by misinformation. Consumers and employees have turned in ever greater numbers to companies as a trusted news source. Elsewhere in the mainly virtual world in which we've been living, companies, organisations and NGOs are all talking about building back better. While too many underplay the role of governments, it's important to remember that companies can have the impact of towns, of cities, and even small countries. In Mars's case, our environmental footprint is equivalent to a country like Panama, and our economic footprint, depending on how you do the multiplier, is equivalent to Luxembourg or Ukraine. In fact, I was in a meeting only last week when the combined market cap of the companies there together was the equivalent of Japan. So companies acting together can have a real force within the world. I think 2020 has shown us that communication has never been more critical. COVID has essentially confirmed, I think, what we've always known, that communication plays a vital role in building meaningful relationships, and that is especially important in times of crisis. We're already seeing communications lessons emerging from this crisis. Principally that communications can never simply be words. All those purpose statements written pre-COVID are really being put to the test. And the pandemic is separating the companies that say something from those that do it. And I strongly believe that the purposeful will win. And one thing I really want to share with you is that we know that through the pandemic, good communications has literally saved lives. By getting a simple message over about social distancing, about good hygiene, about how to stop the spread of the virus, we know that many company communicators have made a real difference to the lives of the associates and the employees in those businesses. So over the next 20 minutes, I want to talk a little about the role of purpose in business generally and at Mars specifically. I think if you look at business and the business world, there is increasing recognition that companies are far more than just a vehicle for employing people and making money. We are actors in society and can play both a positive and negative role. And if you recognise that, then you really need to set a direction. With COVID-19, the world is facing a challenge unlike we've ever seen before. For Mars, as a privately held, family-owned company, our principles and our purpose have really guided everything that we've done. We've had three priorities throughout: to protect the health and well-being of our associates, to do our part to stop the spread of the virus, and to ensure business continuity. And at the same time, we've really focused on our local communities. We made a $20 million commitment of cash and in-kind giving. In fact, we've actually given more than 26 million. That included a $5 million donation to support care for critical supplies and expertise that were deployed in the developing world to women, children and refugee populations. A $2 million donation to the United Nations World Food Programme to aid in the transport and delivery of critical supplies for all United Nations agencies as they respond to the pandemic. And a $1 million donation to the Humane Society International to help cats and dogs that have been abandoned, left behind or surrendered to shelters due to their owners falling ill or no longer having the financial means to care for them. And the remaining 20 million or so has come from a combination of cash and in-kind donations from across the markets where Mars operates, as well as donations from the company foundations, including the Mars Wrigley Foundation, the Banfield Foundation, the Pedigree Foundation, and here in India, the Tasty Bart Foundation. In India, we've also made a commitment to partnering with NGOs to reach health workers with our products, as well as collaborate on addressing animal welfare particularly feeding homeless dogs and cats during the crisis and lockdown. And finally, we're continuing to deliver the products and services that our consumers, clients, and their pets depend upon, including those that people have stocked up their pantries with for themselves and their pets during COVID, and care throughout our over 2,500 veterinary hospitals worldwide. This all comes back to purpose, which for us is a simple articulation of an organization's North Star. I think this is very important, but if your purpose cannot be used as a lens to make business decisions, it's probably not a purpose, but a strapline. I think the most challenging aspect is that purpose needs to come from the reality of who you are, yet it also needs to be aspirational. It needs to represent both where you are now and where you want to be in the future in a way that is credible and believable. So it needs to be rooted in who you are, where you come from, and what is it possible for you to achieve. We very much view purpose as a journey. You can see and hear this in our purpose statement, which is the world that we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. We use that to look at every aspect of our business and our role in society and consider how we can use our business to drive positive change. Now, there are three things that make Mars unique. We take a long-term approach. We view things in generations, not financial quarters. We're family-owned, and the family want it to remain family-owned for the long term, which really gives us financial freedom. And it's very principles-driven. For Mars, it's very much about the how rather more than the what. We employ 135 employees, we call them associates, across the globe in more than 80 countries. And we sell in a further 180. And I think probably if you looked in the remaining 15 or 20 or so countries, you'd probably find some of our products there. I'm often amazed that when I go to places, when I see products that we don't import into that market, they're actually there and they're on sale. Many people, including many of you joining us today, probably know us best for our confectionery brands, Snickers, Skittles, and M&Ms. Fewer know that, in fact, our biggest business is in pet care, where more than 65,000 Mars associates proudly take care of around half the world's pets through our nutrition, veterinary health, and services business. And purpose is a common thread to all those businesses. Our articulation of a formal purpose is relatively recent. We came on it in 2018 and we launched it in 2019. And I'm happy to talk about why later. But Mars has always been principles-led. Our 5 principles of quality, responsibility, mutuality, efficiency, and freedom have been deep-rooted in our company's history, culture, and the way we do business. And they very much come from the Mars family. So our challenge wasn't to invent a purpose, but to articulate one that's existed through 100 years of history. To be able to communicate the benefit of that purpose and not the feature. And to do so when also Mars is a family name, which is always a high bar. When you look at the purpose, I think there are quite key questions to ask us and others are, how do you judge business success? To what extent is purpose a fundamental part of your business? And do you have metrics for it? At Mars, our answer to that is something called the Mars Compass. It sets out what the Mars family, who are our shareholders, believe are the objective of the business, which includes strong financial performance, being well positioned for future growth, having a positive impact on the world, and being a trusted partner in society. And the board and the management team are required to deliver against that and report against that. It really is a 360-degree approach that touches every aspect of our business. Now, it almost goes without saying that purpose without financial performance isn't possible. But it's also important to stress that actually financial performance without purpose is pretty meaningless. If all your company does is make money, you won't survive for a very long term. Unless, of course, you're in the business of printing money. At Mars, our purpose sets a clear expectation for our leaders. It's the core of how we measure business performance and deliver against the Mars family's objectives for the business. It's a rallying cry for our associates to orientate their business. It's something that makes the family owners of the business proud, and it's something that brings huge benefits to the communities in which we operate. So how do we stack up? Are we living in truth? Well, we can point to many examples where we have been doing this for a long time. For starters, and given this group here today I'm talking to, I think it's important to acknowledge that how we work as communicators. With many well-known brands loved worldwide, we take responsible marketing very seriously. As well as endorsing and abiding by the provisions from the International Chamber of Commerce Framework for Responsible Food and Beverage Marketing Communication, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Mars was one of the first companies to launch our own responsible marketing code in 2007. It applies to the marketing communications for all our food, chocolate, confections and gum products, both produced and licensed by Mars globally and across all of our channels, from advertising to packaging to websites. At the heart of a code is a commitment not to market to children younger than 12 years old, because we believe they're unable to identify and, more importantly, understand the persuasive intent of marketing. Instead, we choose to equip gatekeepers like parents with the information they need to decide what is right for their child's diet. The code also defines for our consumers our commitments to promote our brand's responsibility, and that our market will not undermine and will encourage, where appropriate, the pursuit of healthy, balanced diets and active lifestyles. In addition to how we market, we believe that everyone should have access to the products and information they need to enable them to live healthy lives. That's why we provide transparent, factual information across our entire food portfolio so that consumers can make informed choices. That means displaying the guideline daily amount, GBDA labeling, including calories, on the front of packaging, and additional information about other nutrients on the back. We're also continuously looking to improve the nutritional content of our product, like reducing trans fats, sugar, salt, saturated fats, and calories wherever possible. Across our entire portfolio, committed to completely removing all partially hydrogenated oils, PHO, and limit the presence of industrially produced trans fatty acids. And I'm proud to say that we achieved both of those back in 2018. We've also seen how purpose can drive business growth. Our single most successful brand, Royal Canin, has purpose baked into its business strategy. It's around a call of cats and dogs first, and through it they deliver specialized, research-driven nutrition, which is fine-tuned with feedback and partnership from the veterinarian communities. Purpose very much can be the engine for business success, and Royal Canin is proof of that. And if you ever spend any time within a Royal Canin business, you can see that passion for treating cats and dogs first really coming through, and really very much to the core. You know, it's almost omnipresent in every decision, in every meeting room. And as I mentioned earlier, our purpose is an active one, and it implicitly recognizes that today we're not always where we want to be. The world we want tomorrow isn't how we do business today. The world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today, recognizing that we're on a journey. So we use it to examine areas of our business where we may not be at where we want to be, so that we can make the necessary changes. For example, you may have seen our recent announcement to rebrand our Uncle Bren's rice as Ben's Original. And this really stemmed from an acknowledgement of the inequalities that were associated with the name and face of the previous brand. This came about because we listened to the voices of consumers, especially those in the Black community, and of our associates worldwide. We recognised it was the right time to evolve the brand, given our ambition to create a more inclusive future that everyone deserved. And this is a big change to make. This is a very big and successful global brand. And I should note that when we changed the name, we didn't just change the name and the brand identity. We also took steps to enhance inclusion and diversity that comes from a new brand purpose, and to create opportunities that offer everyone a seat at the table, from increased recognition in our workforce leadership and talent pipeline, to better utilising our spend, especially among suppliers, in order to drive positive change. This is where words and actions must go hand in hand. But purpose doesn't just come through in how we treat our associates, create our products, or market our brands. It's also how we interact with our communities where we operate and source many of our raw materials. That's true mutuality, and it's why in Mars's Sustainable Generation Plan, which was launched in 2017, came with $1 billion investment to extend our focus deep into our extended supply chain. And that, in fact, that plan itself was a significant proof point at our purpose launch. We've assessed our agricultural supply chain and really prioritized 10 raw materials that have a big impact on our business, but also have big social and environmental challenges. In doing so, it means that we're not shying away from talking about some really tough topics. So with those, we talk about poverty, we talk about deforestation, we talk about basic human rights. You know, for all the communicators in the room, I think you'll know that few people thank you when you talk about difficult and negative issues, and when you admit that things aren't where you want them to be and need to change. But it's only about talking about them that you really build a coalition of the willing, that you really increase the pressure for change. So communications is actually a vital part of the change, however uncomfortable it is. A good example of this is something like palm oil. Palm oil is used in more than half the world's packaged goods across a range of food and personal care items. When produced sustainably, palm oil is great. It delivers wonderful things to the supply chain, and it delivers great livelihoods for smallholder farmers, suppliers, and workers. But also it's driving deforestation in Southeast Asia, and there are often complex human rights issues associated with that. Our most recent achievement in this area came last month when we announced our Palm Positive plan, which has delivered deforestation-free palm oil, so 100% deforestation-free palm oil supply chain, a significant milestone in our efforts to tackle deforestation and advance respect for human rights. And we've done this through radically simplifying our supply chain. Through this supply chain simplification plan, we're taking the number of mills we source from 1,500 to fewer than 100 by next year. And we're on a path to further half that in 2022. When you get it down to only getting your product from 50 mills, it's much easier to have much greater transparency in what's going on. And we're doing this by awarding long-term contracts only to suppliers who can commit to our standards across their whole supply chain. So we're not just changing the quality of palm oil we're getting, we're setting standards that have to be applied to everything that's coming out of that mill. So in Mars, I think we like to think we practice what we preach. And I think this is, and this is just one example of how we're identifying areas that are difficult, that we need to improve, and we're actually doing so by hard baking it into our business operations. If we look at another difficult and important issue, climate change, over the last 2 years, we've broken the link between economic growth and carbon growth. And to some extent, that is really what you would call the holy grail for environmentalism. You can be a more successful business, producing more, yet reducing our emissions. I mean, we're looking at a business that's 30% bigger with 4% less emissions. You know, those are big changes. We have science-based targets for our greenhouse gas emissions. So we want to reduce it by 27% by 2025 and 67% by 2050. And that's to do our part to ensure that we can help keep the planet from warming beyond 2 degrees, making sure that we're playing our part in meeting the Paris commitment. Over the last 3 years, we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions in our operations, so in the directly things that we control, by 10%. We're actually something like 45% lower in our operations since, I think, 2007. We're now at the situation where, of all the electricity we buy now, 53% is renewable. And it means that in countries like the US and the UK, we are only using renewable electricity. I can point to some other examples. Our partnership with a company like Danone on the Livelihoods Fund for Family Farming, where we together are investing 120 million euros to develop sustainable agriculture projects that improve incomes to smallholder farmers, while also tackling food security and restoring ecosystems. We're aiming to positively impact 200,000 farms through this Livelihoods Fund in areas like rice, vanilla, and shea butter. I'm very proud of sustainability investments that we're making on a number of important commodities that we use as a business. Some of the supply chains that begin where you are in India are at the heart of those efforts. Take, for example, the Sustainable Rice Platform, the first ever global standard for sustainable rice. And because of it, everyone in the rice supply chain will be able to use this standard to reduce the environmental footprint of growing rice and improve the life of rice farmers. We're committed to sustainably source 100% of our rice. And we've already started to pilot this program in both India and Pakistan, offering incentives to farmers, providing training and support on how to make their farms more sustainable. And when you see some of these projects, you're reducing water usage by a third and increasing yield by a third. I mean, it is quite incredible the difference that makes to both the environment and the livelihood of the farmers. Mint also comes to mind as a very important specialty crop. It's mainly grown in the Northwest and in the Pacific Northwest in the US and in Canada and India. And it provides livelihoods to more than 1 million farmers. Each geographic region has its own issues that need to be addressed with mint. In North America, there are a lot to do with climate change and some of that environmental sustainability. In India, it's a lot to do with income and yields. And so we're working with farmers and experts via our advanced mint program, which in India is known as Shubh Mint, so that we can better understand the different agricultural footprints, as well as the different social, economic, and environmental challenges. Through these efforts, by 2025, we aim to advance mint science by collaborating with research partners, reduce water consumption by 30% in water-stressed areas by promoting good agricultural practice, and improve smallholder farmer incomes by partnering with industry experts and suppliers. And I've spent quite a lot of time on mint farms, and I know that mint is a very valuable crop, a very valuable commodity. It's a cash crop, but yields are still too low, and they could be much higher, which brings benefits for everybody. If we look at, say, peanuts, they're another important crop that we're working with in our supply chain. They're very important in India. I mean, India, in fact, is the world's second largest producer of peanuts. Yet farmers face significant challenges that hinder production. Those challenges include low yields, have a limited extension support, there's a lack of training, and a lack of quality control measures to fight critical food safety concerns. And peanuts are a crop that you can have problems with. You can have aflatoxins, and we often find that we have to turn peanuts delivered to our plants right around the world away because they don't meet those safety concerns. And peanuts that don't get into the human food chain, essentially money is being left on the table for farmers. So that's why we are engaging with a network of partners to drive meaningful change. One of them is Tanajay, an international non-profit that works to create economic and social opportunities that increase smallholder farmer incomes. We also invest in local initiatives that provide a direct impact, like Mangal Moonfai, which is our farming and training program that we launched in partnership with Tanajay in 2018. In its first year, the program trained more than 900 peanut farmers and helped increase crop yield by nearly 30% on farmer demonstration projects. Our partnership proves that the action we take today makes a direct impact on farmers' livelihoods, helping those that we need in our supply chain thrive. For me, the current and past progress can be seen as a guide to the future success we're looking to achieve. We've seen with our work through Palm that the current pandemic doesn't have to be a barrier to progress, and we've moved those programs forward even though we've had a COVID-19 global pandemic. Of course, in many areas, COVID has had dramatic economic consequences. But for a big company like Mars, one that's largely been insulated from some of the worst economic effects, we've been able to use our resources and global scale through the pandemic to enable better, more sustainable, more purpose-driven ways of working, as consumers and the business community at large begins returning to a new normal of activity. One final thought I want to share around our purposeful work is that you don't need to go alone. In fact, in most cases, it's impossible to achieve things on your own. If I look at Mars and our own carbon footprint, only 6% of it is from our direct operations. Well over 90% of it is something that occurs well outside of our own four walls. And so to deliver change in these areas, you absolutely need partnerships. And I think we've found that this has been the case throughout. And all of our supply chain work, that we know that to create the most meaningful and measurable difference, you have to create a movement. And with big brands, there becomes almost a responsibility to do that. That's why, as we work to deliver on purpose, we are building new partnership and action-orientated coalitions to find and scale breakthrough solutions to sustainable growth. The Livelihoods one, the fund that I mentioned previously, is one example. Another is the Lion's Share fund, which was co-founded by Mars, the United Nations Development Programme, and a number of others. And it's where advertisers donate a small percentage of paid media spend for ads that, when they have an advert in them that uses the image of an animal, cartoon or real in fact, to finance wildlife conservation and animal welfare globally. It's a really simple idea that many brands are stepping up to, and if you're interested in it, do let me know. From our communications to our factories and beyond, we are really working to advance respect for human rights, improve levels of productivity, ensure accurate representation and equal access, and increase incomes throughout our supply chain. This proactive collaboration with our peers, suppliers, customers, governments, non-governmental organizations, the scientific community is driving industry-wide improvements, ensuring that we're able to create mutual benefits for all involved. In closing, I want to say 5 things for your consideration. Number 1, the most important thing is what you choose to do rather than what you choose to say. Purpose is not first and foremost a communications discipline. Purpose for me is a fundamental business philosophy. Secondly, from a communications professional point of view, if you have a purpose that is clear and believable and is also real and aspirational, then it can be a very effective way of telling the story of a company. But that's the benefit, it's not the objective. Thirdly, embracing purpose and picking destinations means you have to have a point of view, and when you have a point of view, you will have something that not everyone agrees on. So if something matters, you need to be willing to take a stand, and you need to be willing to say something, and you need to be willing to take the criticism. And in the new media age of the algorithm and of social media, the one thing's for certain is the criticism will always be heard. And sometimes that's a very harsh discourse. This is not for faint hearts. Fourthly, the role of corporations is evolving. Having a focused mission to deliver and communicate positive change is now a clear part of our mandate as communicators. We all have to be able to live comfortably in this world of purpose. And finally, number 5, the way the world is moving now, and the history we're living through right now, is the biggest ever test case of a company's mission. And so walking the walk has never been so important. Thank you.
Great, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Andy, for some great insights on how purpose of communications and PR emerges from a strong purpose of the company itself, a lesson that all of us should take. Thanks for that. Now, I'd like to ask you a few questions, Andy, on behalf of all the audience who are watching this summit today. and on behalf of young professionals who hope to make it big in the industry. Basis some of the insights that you shared with us, one thing that definitely came out very sharply is that communication is definitely interpreted differently by different audiences. Um, Today, in today's world, there is a very heightened sensitivity to communication by brands. And there are a lot of recent examples in the Indian context where brands put out communication that were meant to mean something, but were interpreted totally out of context by audiences and create a lot of problem for these brands. Now, in that context, you spoke about rebranding Uncle Ben's Rice to Ben's Original to acknowledge a lot of inequities of association by different people. We'd like to understand, it would be very interesting to know how you went about communicating such a sensitive subject such as this. Can you just talk us through the process that the company went through when you decided to rebrand to Ben's Original?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first of all, we made the change, and I talked about it a little bit because fundamentally it was the right thing to do, and in fact, it was the only right thing to do at the time. We'd been discussing the Uncle Ben's brand had been with us since the 1940s, and the cultural context that it was developed in was a very different one to the cultural context we live through now, and so it really made it important to make the change. I think the very important thing here is that we actually spent a considerable amount of time speaking to our associates, to our consumers. In fact, we spoke to thousands of consumers. We spoke to community leaders and stakeholders. And so we really sought their views on what the right thing to do was, because actually throughout the whole process, we were hearing very different approaches on what was the right thing to do. And almost every demographic was split on what was the right stance to take. And so we really listened to those voices, and we used them to help identify a new name and a purpose, and really to make sure it resonated and would be welcomed and would be put us in position for ongoing success with the brand. And that brand is a very important brand. It's an important brand to us globally. Its home in the US is in the Mississippi Delta. And so we had an awful lot of Black Americans who we employ who were very concerned that we would make the wrong call with an important brand that was critical for the livelihood of the business they worked in and the town that they lived in. And the research that we did and the conversation we had showed that people wanted a change. They liked the change that we presented, and they liked the new directions. And we also knew that there was a big group of consumers that didn't believe the brand needed to change at all. And so, of course, we listened to them respectfully, but we remain committed to these changes, and we think it's an important thing to do. And really, because I think all of us have a big role to play in creating a more inclusive and equitable future.
Congratulations, Andy, to you and your team for the wonderful work and contribution to help and support relief work during the pandemic. Working with communities seems to be a part of the DNA of your organization at Mars, given your work on supporting local communities and sustainable sourcing of mint and peanuts and other products in India. We'd be very keen to understand how you craft communications around sustainability initiatives, particularly how you use PR as a tool to be a part of that larger communication bouquet.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So our Sustainable Generation Plan has got three core pillars: healthy planet, thriving people, and nourishing well-being. And it is a plan that we've communicated on, and we filter a lot of our global storytelling through these pillars. But I think the most important thing to understand is that communications was actually part of the business strategy around sustainable generation. And it was really for around two areas. The first one was we're spending $1 billion on it. And part of the cost-benefit analysis of making those changes was actually, it was important to tell the story to make Mars an increasingly attractive place to people to work, for talent. It was important that we got our message across to local communities. And so actually, part of the business plan was using sustainability as a core means to differentiate ourselves. The second thing, and why communications was important, is that almost none of the change that we want to achieve can we do on our own. We really need to create a coalition of the willing. And so going out and telling our story and going out and talking about the difficult issues and the changes we were making and where we need partnership was actually critical to achieving the goals that we were really setting. So right from the start, communications was critical to prove the investment was worth it and delivering the change we needed to see. Then when you talk about the various media tools, and if you look at the various sort of tools you have in the communications toolbox, I think that that PR is particularly valuable on complex topics like sustainability, because one, they are inherently newsworthy, so there's something that people want to write on and are writing on or are making programs about. Two, I think with PR you have a greater opportunity to engage in a much more reasoned and longer conversation with those concerned. Now that doesn't rule out other parts of the marketing mix, but I think that it really is on lots of sustainability action the key discipline. Now, I think if you then take it forward and tell sort of cause-related stories about your brands and try to connect your consumer brands with the sustainability cause, then I think it's much more of a traditional marketing suite that we would look to use.
The last few months have clearly been very, very unpredictable and unprecedented for sure. As communication professionals, all of us have been through a journey over the last few months and learned many new things and perhaps unlearned quite a few things. I have two questions on that aspect. One, a generic industry level question, and the other one, a more personal reflection that we'd like to hear from you more on. So the first part of my question is, like you mentioned, PR, which is a credible earned source of communication, has gained increased importance during the pandemic time and has also undergone a lot of transformation. Media and publications have changed in the way they operate. They have moved completely towards digital sources at many levels. Loss of revenue for a lot of media houses and publications have cost them very, very dearly. How do you see this transformation going forward in shaping how media houses and PR function for companies? What would you say are the long-term impacts or changes that PR and media will see as a result of this pandemic?
I think one of the biggest changes I've seen over perhaps the last 10 years is just how much owned media and owned channels have become increasingly important. It almost used to be the last place you'd go to find anything out about a company was on its website, and websites were dull, slow, they didn't really say very much, and they were the most conservative news that any company could control would be through its website. What I've seen very much over the past 2 to 3 years is that the own channels, the website, but particularly the social channels, have become a core part of telling your story, and we saw this very much during the pandemic, where actually consumers, wide groups of people were turning to companies as a trusted news source. And so I think that as a communicator, if you have responsibility for your own channels, you have a much greater ability to tell your story direct, and that doesn't mean that the media that itself is less important, but it's not the only way you can get your message across to a much broader group of people. We think very, very carefully about our channels, and if you view them as that important, then you actually need to think very carefully about when do you advertise, when do you stop saying things. We certainly found that we stepped back from some social media platforms for a couple of months over the summer this year around what we believed was a failure on them to tackle hate speech. We think very carefully when there are global events going on. Is that the right time to communicate on our own channels? And we're in some ways having to make the same calls that some of the media networks would make on what they communicate and when. So I think with the power that comes from having much more believable channels and channels with greater reach, there also comes the responsibility that comes. And so on that kind of issue, we've worked with other global organizations through the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, and to really establish guidelines and best practices, particularly around online content, recognizing that much of the governance that you had was pointed to a media environment that's perhaps less relevant.
So that was one part of the question. And the second question, on a more personal note, what has been the biggest lesson for you from all of this? What are the things that you have learned and unlearned as a professional?
I mean, I learn many things every day, and I think when you stop learning in roles like this, then you stop growing and you stop being able to do your job well. I mean, obviously, if I look at me and the life stage I'm at, I am not a digital media native, and so I'm learning all the time from people who essentially grew up with with Twitter as the means of communications, and so there are a whole degree of craft skills that I'm constantly learning. I have learned, at a global level, just how critical communications is, and what we've seen this year is demonstrated is it also can be life-saving. We know that the message that we've got out to our associates has literally kept people out of dangerous situations. And I'm very proud that the work that our corporate affairs function has done throughout the pandemic, and how it has managed information and communication in a way that saved lives. So there's been a huge responsibility. I think I've also learned, I think, increased recognition on just how important it is to connect and check in with each other. And one of the things that I think has been much clearer over this year is that we're much more now willing to talk about the importance of mental wellness, and it's just as important, perhaps sometimes in need of greater care than our physical health. So I see a lot of changes, and a lot of changes actually that are for the good.
We live in a world that is fast adopting a global way of living, if I can use that word. Audiences consume information from global sources, but expect context that is local. They have access to information through expanded sources from many, many different parts of the world. You as a company and many other multinational companies today have audiences across the globe. Would be great to understand from you, how do you strike the right kind of balance between messaging that is global while ensuring local and cultural context for various geographies? How is it that you retain a certain level of uniformity and global flavor to what you say while ensuring a local connect? And we'd like to understand your response in terms of the very process that you use in evolving communication, and also in more executional aspects like teams, how collaboratively these teams work, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there was an American politician who said all politics is local, and in reality, probably all communications is really local. People are only going to truly engage with communications in the extent that they believe it impacts with them and is relevant. So that relevance can be on big global issues, they can be on big local issues, or they can just simply be on big personal issues. So I think far better than worry about global or local is really just focus on relevance and really root your communications in the mind and in the ear of the person receiving them. And I think the second thing I would say then is I think it's important to be sensitive. If you're sensitive about how people receive those communications, then you need to be quite deft at deciding what and when to communicate on, and recognizing that I know that what was important to communicate on in Q4 2020 was very different to what was important to communicate in Q4 2019. So when one is doing communications planning, the idea of locking a plan in August for the following 12 for the 12 months starting in January is making less and less sense. I think the other important lesson is that if you're going to be successful as a communicator, you really do need to be empowered. You know, the speed with which stories develop, which news moves on, and with a news cycle that is roughly 2 hours now from a story breaking, from you having the ability to get in and influence it before it moves on with or without you, means that you really need to empower people to make principled decisions. If you rely on everything going up through 3 or 4 levels of management to approve it, you've probably missed it, and you could well become the story in a really bad way.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. Very insightful and very detailed indeed. I'll move to my next question, and this is hugely debatable in any part of the world, I presume. Communication through PR and the measurement of that impact. Now, this has been an eternal debate in the industry all through. Different companies have formed different kind of matrices to measure PR as per what is important to them, as per what is clearly the objective of the company. Would be very interesting to understand from you, Andy, how do you think PR should be measured? You spoke in great detail about the Mars compass being a key aspect of how you measure business success. How do you measure PR under Mars compass?
Well, let's be clear. The Mars compass sets out the Mars family shareholder objectives for Mars. We report on it on an annual basis. We have metrics against it, which we report to them on, and we actually use those metrics to remunerate our senior leadership. So it is a very important measure. Within that, reputation is a key measure of trust, and we actually measure the trusted partner quadrant in 2 ways. One is what is the corporate reputation of Mars globally, across a number of important countries, of which India is one of them. And we also measure the level of trust we have with our associates. And so we see reputation as being a shareholder metric, being a boardroom metric, and around a management metric. For me, that's a different question of how you measure PR. And we would measure PR really in the same sort of way that we would measure any other form of the marketing mix. You know, it's really around reach. You know, are you getting messages to people, and the effectiveness of those messages? When I think about our corporate reputation, we're looking about what people think about us, yes, and so what's our overall reputation. But within it, then we look at 3 key things. The first one is, do they know of Mars? Are they aware of Mars? One of the things that we've found is that more people know about Mars, the more they like it, and so for us, awareness is a key metric. We measure how willing people say they are to work for us. That's quite a good, a big thing. If you're willing to put your financial livelihood in the hands of a particular company, are you willing to work with us? That's something that we measure. It's important. We also measure whether people say they're willing to speak positively about us. So if you're in an argument and somebody says something bad about a company, are you the person in the company in that argument or discussion who would say, actually, no, I disagree. I think that's a great company. And so we measure that, awareness, willing to work for, willing to speak positively about as key components of reputation. And they certainly help us tell our corporate story. But we, of course, have much more. We have a PR measurement that's much broader than that, really around all of the marketing programs that we do. And I think one of the big things that communicators need to get comfortable with really is much better about metrics and data. I said earlier on that we're in a stage now where communications is really at the center of business. It's a critical part to business success. It's being treated more seriously than it's ever been treated. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a great thing. But it also means we're more accountable than we've ever been before. We have a greater need than ever before to prove our worth. And so we really need the discipline of the CMO or the CFO and really bring it into the communications room.
Brilliant. Great to hear that. Andy, thank you so very much for making time. to be a part of Spectra. And I now hand it back over to Anubhuti.